Okay, hello, I'm Rachel, and yeah, I'm a member here. I'm excited to be looking at this next passage of John with you. I was wondering what perhaps you have, what you own, that is something you would consider to be particularly valuable, perhaps your most valuable possession. Maybe don't include something like big, like a house or a car, if you're privileged enough to own one. One of the things that I would say has been, maybe in the past, one of my most valuable things is my violin. Now, I don't know if anyone knows I'd played the violin. It's not something I talk about that much. But I grew up playing the violin. I grew up in a very musical family. My mum is a violinist by kind of profession, I guess. That's what she did. She came over to England to study music. That was her main reason. And she then stayed when she met my dad and all those things. And I therefore started to learn to play the violin really, really young, when I was 5 years old. So like really, really teeny tiny, with a really, really teeny tiny violin, which is like they call them like an eighth size of like the actual big size, and you kind of go up. And the thing is, I kind of played when I was 5, and I carried on having lessons until I was 18. And so, quite a lot of years. And you get bigger. So you have to get a bigger violin and a bigger violin and bigger violin, kind of go eighth, quarter size, half size, three-quarter size. And then finally, you get to have a full-size violin. And the thing about the full-size violin is very different to the others, because the others you get for a little bit and then you get bigger, so you have to get a new one. The full-size violin is like your violin for life. It's like the thing that once you got it, you stick with it, because string instruments get better with age. There's literally no reason, unless it's seriously just damaged, that you'd ever replace it. You keep it because it gets better. It's like wine, I guess, like how wine gets better with age. I know nothing about wine. So yeah, and so therefore there came a day when I was big enough to own a full-size violin when I was a teenager, because you just don't grow anymore. And so my mum came home with 3, and I had to choose. And at that time, she wouldn't let me look at it, so I couldn't make a choice based on how it looked, its appearance. I had to turn around, and she went behind me and she played stuff. And I had to choose it based on how it sounded and the tone it made and what I thought sounded the nicest. And naturally, I didn't know this at the time, but I chose the most expensive, which means I obviously had very good taste, didn't I? Obviously very musical somewhere quite deep down. Sadly today, I don't think it's as valuable to me as it used to be, because it lives in my wardrobe in its case, and it hasn't seen the light of day for quite a long time. Actually, the last time I can remember, I've just saw Olivia out the corner of my eye, and the last time it kind of saw its light of day, we kind of used it as one of our lessons where we serenaded some children. We wanted to get them to write a really stroppy piece of complaint letter. So we basically gave them the worst experience ever. We told them that we were going to take them to a restaurant, where we actually took them to the classroom and we fed them chocolate cake drizzled with vinegar. And me and Olivia serenaded them with the worst playing you could ever imagine. And we were like the worst servers, and we were really grumpy. They wrote excellent complaint letters as a result. But that's the only reason my violin has come out of the darkness for a very long time. So today, we are going to be talking about value and what we value. We're looking at the person of Mary in John, and this is not really a spoiler, is it, to say that we're going to be talking about the fact that Mary valued Jesus above all things. So, as we do that, let's just come and pray. So, Father God, we just thank you for your word. We thank you that your word is living and active. We thank you that you speak to us through it today, as you always have done. And we just ask that you would come now by the power of your Holy Spirit, and that you would speak to us through your word. We know that you want to speak to us. We know that you want to change us and make us more like you. So come, Lord Jesus, and speak to us. Okay, so working through the book of John, it's exploring who Jesus is. And over the last couple of weeks, we've heard how Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. We've heard how this caused many, many leaders to get pretty stroppy, pretty unhappy, and then to start to use this as the excuse to get rid of Jesus, which is what they had been wanting to do for such a long time, because he threatened their power. And so we are going to read a little bit the end of chapter 11, and we're going to move into chapter 12 today. So it's fun. Would you like me to do it? So Sarah's going to come and read it with Arabami to help her. Thank you very much.
Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple courts, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the festival at all?" But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it so that they might arrest him. So, chapter 12?
Yeah.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in. "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For an account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him.
Thank you. Great multitasking here. Thank you very much. Okay, so we started at the end of chapter 11, where he's retreated to Ephraim because of the plot to take his life. He didn't retreat there and go there because he's afraid of the religious leaders. It just wasn't the right time yet. It needed to be in God's timing. It can't be in people's timing. Jesus was going to die at the time of Passover, and his death would mirror the Passover, where where the Passover lamb was sacrificed to remember Jesus. Remember God rescuing the Israelites from slavery, and now God's own lamb was preparing to be sacrificed for the sins of the world and to win eternal freedom for his people. So now, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, and he broke his journey at Bethany. When Jesus shows up, they immediately throw a party in his honor, which is great, right? I think sometimes we can think of Jesus being very, very serious. But actually, when Jesus comes, people have a party. That's a response to him. I've been reading a book lately by John Piper, which is called Don't Waste Your Life. It's quite hard-hitting, and it makes you really, really think. But basically, he says the same thing again and again and again through the book. It's pretty repetitive. He basically says, we're supposed to enjoy Jesus and give glory to him. Those are the two things that we're called to do. And we are supposed to enjoy Jesus. We're supposed to enjoy our relationship with him. We're supposed to enjoy the life that he has given us here on earth and look forward to the glory of heaven as well. When they arrive, Martha is serving. She's known for serving. She's served in lots of passages. Interesting here that she doesn't criticize for serving, because sometimes it is right to be serving Jesus in practical ways. So it's not that she was doing the wrong thing. It's just that this time she was serving and God and Jesus was happy with that. Lazarus was reclining, as was the custom of the day. We sit, they would have reclined. So they'd have had one hand to rest his head on and the other hand would be eating, which I don't think particularly feels comfortable, but that is what would have been normal. Perhaps they'd have been used to that. And then Mary interrupts the party, doesn't she, by taking a really expensive perfume and pouring it all over Jesus' feet and wiping it with his hair. So this is an unusual act, isn't it? It's a strange thing to do. It's not what we perhaps often see at a party. So we're going to explore Mary's act a little bit. And so firstly, Mary's act. It was an act of worship. When she saw Jesus, she was moved to worship him. And as we were worshipping earlier, I kind of thought, well, I think the band have just basically done the sermon for us today. Like, they have just shown us what this passage is about. We are just called to worship Jesus. And we worship Jesus when we realize how much he is worth, when we understand his worth. And Mary understood how much Jesus is worth. We know, don't we, that there is no doubt about God being worthy and worthy of our worship. Look at what he's done for us. Look at what he created. We look at our world. We look at the mountains. We look at the stars. And we are amazed by what God has done, what he's created. Like, he is so worthy of our worship. And we look at what Jesus has done for us on the cross. And we move to worship him because there's no doubt that this is worthy of worship. He gave everything for us. Look at what he promised us for all of eternity. He's promised us eternity in heaven with him. Like, no one else can offer us that. He is worthy of our worship. And this comes from seeing Jesus as he truly is. But sometimes, perhaps we don't always see God that clearly. And the image that we have of him can get dulled over time through experiences and all sorts of things. As I've been reading this passage over the last few weeks and preparing, I've had a phrase in my head that kind of just popped up. And the phrase is strip back the layers. And as I've been reflecting on that and talking to God about that and asking what that was about, I kind of had this picture of a piece of art, like an old painting. And I know as much about art as I know about wine, like literally nothing. But I found this picture that I can show you here. It's called A Woman in Red. And I don't know if it's a good picture or a bad picture, or if it's not particularly famous, so I couldn't find out who actually painted it. So it can't have been that famous or that good. But the thing that I found interesting about it, and the thing I noticed, is that for 200 plus years, it was covered in a layer of varnish. I don't even know if that's like just to preserve it or to try and keep it looking good for longer. But actually, what it has done, it has dulled the picture. It's kind of made it a bit beige and a bit not very full of life. And then 200 years later, someone called Philip Mould then restores the painting. He strips away the varnish bit by bit using some sort of chemical-y thing that destroys the varnish but doesn't destroy the painting underneath to reveal what the painting originally looked like. And you can see the difference. You can see what the original artist intended it to look like. You can see that the colour is so much brighter, it's so much clearer, and it's so less beige. And I just thought that actually what can happen in our vision of Jesus, even though we know that he is worthy, even though we know that he is above all things, in life, sometimes we can get layers of things that cover our picture. And it can change us. And the thing is, God never changes, does he? We know that. His love for us never changes. The significance of what Jesus did for us will never change. And so therefore his worth never changes, but our vision can do. And it can happen really gradually, can't it? Life can just get a little bit busy. And the things in our life can just start to seem a little bit more important than perhaps they should do, a bit more important than Jesus. And it can just be like a film of like dirt or dust or grime or varnish starts to cover that picture. And our image of Jesus gets a bit dulled. The sharpness goes, the brightness goes. And then perhaps we experience grief or loss. And as we do that, it can kind of colour our image a little bit of Jesus. We stop thinking perhaps that Jesus is as good, because if he's so good, why do I feel this pain? Do I feel this loss? Do I feel this grief? And that can be like another layer on top. And to start with, it might not even make a huge difference unless you're an expert. But it's a process, isn't it? And then maybe you can, experience anxiety. Life just gets overwhelming and it's just too much. And we get worried about the things. We get worried about what's going to happen in the future, the politics of our world, the wars, all the things that we're experiencing can make us think, oh, actually, perhaps God isn't as in control as I thought. And that can be another layer that just covers the picture, covers our view, covers our image of Jesus. And I think this can just keep happening without us even noticing it for a really, really long time until we get a picture like this. And for probably 200 years, people looking at it going, oh, what a great picture. It's pretty nice. I like it. He must have been a great artist. And then when they saw it, they were like, oh, okay, so we didn't really get the whole point. We didn't get the whole picture. We didn't see what the original vision was. We've lost the clarity of what this person should have looked like. And it's important at this point, I think, to notice that even the probably fully restored version, is still only a picture. So it doesn't matter how well we're seeing Jesus at the moment, it will still only be in part, won't it? We know that for now we see in part, and then we will see him face to face one day. And we know that's not going to be now, that's going to be one day. But we can still see a much clearer vision of Jesus. Because unless we do, we don't fully see his worth, and then our worship isn't as a response to that worth. And because Mary saw this, because Mary saw him in all his fullness, her worship could then be extravagant. And we come to this image of the nard that she uses to pour out on his feet. Nard was a perfume, came from the mountains of India, and so it was quite a long way to go and get the perfume, and it was really, really, really expensive. It says it's worth a year's wages, quite a lot of money, and it implies probably that she was probably from quite a wealthy family. There are other things that suggest that, like the amount of mourners that came when Lazarus was resurrected. So she probably was quite wealthy. But despite that, she was able to see that this perfume, however much it cost her, was like here. And Jesus was like much higher than I can reach. Like, yes, it's worth something. Yes, it's pretty valuable. But in comparison to what she knew of Jesus, it was like it was nothing. She could give it away because it wasn't as important to her as Jesus was. It reminds me of Paul in Philippians, where he said, I consider everything as a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ. And it's very challenging, isn't it? Like, I want to do that. I want to be able to say that I will give anything because Jesus is so much higher than anything else I value. But it's not that easy, is it? Sometimes there are times when we can feel I really want to give everything I have. And there are times when other things can become more important. And we think, actually, I'm holding on to this. I had an experience the other day when I was in Kibworth. Went to the Well, which is a nice little cafe, which is run by Christians, I think. And a guy I was sat there with Evelyn, we had a little coffee. And as he walked out, he had a pastor on his back, so I'm assuming he's a Christian, but he just chucked £2 at me and walked off. And I didn't need the money because I had just bought my coffee. But it was just that, it was something about the fact that he had no preciousness about that. It's £2, but he was it was just so easy for him. He just went, I don't need that. But I don't need it. And so often we can just cling on to the little things that have more worth to us than perhaps they should do. So, yeah, I want to know if I can say this. I want to know if I can say that knowing Christ is more important to me than my family, than my job, and than my ambitions, than anything that I value, than anything I hold dear. Because although those things are all really, really important and all really, really good, and that none of these things are bad, but when they become a higher priority, that is when anxiety creeps in, because I can't control those things. I can't control what happens to my family, as much as I probably try to sometimes. I can't control what's going to happen with my job. I can have ambitions, but I can't fix them. I can't make them happen. And when they are higher than God, when God is not first, and they become first, then I'm trying to control my life, aren't I? And that's when it all goes horribly wrong, let's be honest. So back to Mary. Her worship was really, really fruitful. It says, doesn't it, the whole house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So there was the worship, but it affected everything else. People may not have particularly even known what she did if they didn't see what it was, but they would have smelt it. It changes the atmosphere, it changes the room, it changes how people are feeling, it changes the spiritual temperature, doesn't it? And worship changes things, because by worshiping God, we give him the glory. And there's something spiritual in that. There's a battle, isn't there, that we're fighting all the time. And when we declare that Jesus is Lord, then we are declaring truth over so many lies that the enemy is trying to spread. And it doesn't matter how we're worshipping. I think when I hear this passage, my instant reaction, because of who I am, and I'm naturally kind of a legalistic person, I'm like, okay, so I have to be like Mary. Not literally maybe get my perfume, smash it and pour it, bring it to church and sprinkle it everywhere. But I'm like, what's the most important thing that I value? Now I must go and give that away or do something with it. But that's not necessarily what is being said here. Yes, we need to be willing to give anything. But the call is to be like Mary and see Jesus in his fullness, so that our worship reflects his worth. Our worship is extravagant and it is fruitful and it will make a difference. It doesn't matter how we're worshiping, whether it's through music, whether it's through our acts of service, whether it's in our job, where we're just being a different person in our workplaces, whether it's telling people about Jesus. But when we live our lives valuing God above all things, then people notice. They might not know that they notice, but they notice something. They notice something different. I wonder if you've ever had the experience when you've walked into a building, perhaps that's been used for worship over the centuries, and there's just something there. You can just feel that this place is a place that honors God. Sometimes you come across people, don't you, where you just know that their life is a life of worship, where Jesus is the most important thing, and you can just see that in them. You can feel it in them. You can see it in. There's just like a fragrance that comes to that person. And there are so many people in this church for whom I think that is really, really true. And I don't want to embarrass anybody. So instead, I thought I'd introduce you to this person. You might just swipe one more time. Thank you. This is Father Benedict. He's not alive anymore, so I can embarrass him as much as I like. He's a monk he was a monk in Salzburg. Salzburg is a place that I hold very dear. It's very special to me. I have for years, not for a long time, but as a child and all into my mid-adulthood, been going out to Salzburg because my parents, to go back to the musical theme, were part of their Christian orchestra, their main vision was to provide a specifically Christian act of worship within the classical music field. If that's that way of describing it. But yeah, they wanted to basically worship Jesus through classical music, and that is what they did. And Salzburg is a place that is really, really prestigious for classical music. It's like the place to go. They have this big Salzburg Music Festival in the summer, and my parents' orchestra would go out there every other year and spend 2 weeks putting on concerts to basically worship God. They were free concerts, and it was just a way that showed Jesus to these people. And through that, I met this guy who's called Father Benedict. And what I love about this man is that he is a monk in a silent order. When they're in their monastery, they don't talk. There is no speaking. They just spend all their time with Jesus and worshiping him and praying, and it's amazing. But when you see him outside, you just see this fragrance that just surrounds him. He was the happiest monk I've ever known. He earned himself the name Party Benedict because he used to come after concerts to the Stiftskeller, which is like a big beer hall, I guess, and he would have a drink, more likely have an apple strudel, because that is what you do in Salzburg. And he would sit there and he'd be down with the kids and be rapping the mass, which is not perhaps the most normal thing to do. But as teenagers, we absolutely loved him. He just had this aura of joy. He just loved Jesus. And if you spoke to him about Jesus, his face shone. It really shone. You could just see how much he loved it. And it was really interesting. There's too much to go into detail-wise, but it was really interesting how God used him. And from being a monk who just did normal monk things, he became the abbot of Salzburg, which was a really significant position at the time. There was lots of spiritual things going on that were really tricky. And God really used him for a specific time. And he changed the temperature in that city, and he made a real difference. So I want to look at another character briefly in the story, and that is of Judas. Judas really fascinated me as I read this passage, because I kind of read it, and you just tend to think about Mary first, but actually they make quite a big point of Judas in this passage, don't they? And his reaction to the whole situation. So Judas' reaction, he said that the money should have been sold and given to the poor. And on the surface, right, it's not an unreasonable objection. I don't like waste. I don't like wasting food. James and I have very different views on use-by dates and, eating up leftovers and those sorts of things. I don't like wasting time. When you're stuck in traffic and you literally can't do anything about it, and you need to be somewhere, or you're in a meeting or in a training, and you're it's not particularly good use of my time, and there are other things I could be doing. I don't like that sensation. I don't like waste. But John makes us really clear here, doesn't he, that Judas had slightly ulterior motives. It had nothing really to do with trying to worry about the poor and making those sorts of things. What he really wanted to do was money, because he was motivated by greed. So he had a habit of taking a little bit of money from the bag that he was in control of. Interesting that he was allowed to be in control of it. I'm sure Jesus knew that he was probably taking a little bit of money. So therefore, the more money in the bag, the better for him, right? There's more for him to take. And it's just really clear here, isn't it, that Judas valued Jesus less than he valued money. And I find it really interesting that Judas gets it so wrong. Because when I read about Mary, and I think, I'm trying to think about myself and think about how can I be more like Mary, I'm like, I need to spend more time with Jesus, and I need to sit at his feet, and I need to talk to him, and I need to do all the things. And none of that is wrong, because obviously the more time you spend with Jesus, the better you know him. But Judas was a disciple, right? He spent a lot of time with Jesus. He listened to Jesus. He heard Jesus' voice. He saw Lazarus raised from the dead, I think, probably, right? He saw countless miracles. And yet, he still didn't value Jesus as highly as he valued other things. And I think there's a bit of a warning there for all of us. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter what position we're in. It doesn't matter how much time we spend with Jesus. We are all susceptible to this slippery slope. And the thing is, it's a slippery slope. Jesus didn't turn around and betray Jesus for money on a whim. There's a pattern of behaviour there, isn't there? Over years, he'd been motivated by greed. He'd wanted a little bit more. He'd probably been given the money bag for a bit. I am speculating here, but I'm guessing that he didn't go out of his way initially to do that, but maybe one day he took a little bit. And then another day he took a little bit more. And it became a big thing. And eventually, in a few chapters' time, he then goes on and betrays Jesus for money. But money was such a high value for him, higher than Jesus, even though he knew Jesus really, really well. So it is really easy to look at Judas and be like, oh, we never betray Jesus for money. But I think that maybe just really think that actually we're all susceptible to that, aren't we? Like little sins, little things that get in the way, bad habits, things that are just a higher value than perhaps they should be a little bit. They can become bigger, they can consume us. And I think Judas was very much consumed by his love of money. Jesus responded, didn't he? He defended Mary. When I read into this, I couldn't really find any clear commenters are just very clear on what he meant by it was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. Some say that maybe he used all the perfume at the time, but she would have saved a little bit and then would have used it on his actual burial day. Others say actually it's more like it's a bit more of a tense thing that got a bit muddled in terms of translation, and actually it's more about just her. She will remember it when it comes to Jesus' burial. She'll remember what she did and the prophetic act that it was. But the important thing from what he said is that it was intended. It was part of God's plan. And that this, therefore, was never a waste. And worship is never wasted. It doesn't matter how we worship, when we worship. It doesn't matter if it's at church. It doesn't matter if it's at work. It doesn't matter where it is. But our worship of God is never wasted. Sometimes it might feel like it, or it can feel like a slog. I wonder if there were some people here today, I was just thinking as we were worshipping, it's sacrificial. It's really hard. Sometimes to say the words on the screen, we might know they're true, but they can be really, really painful. And if that is you today, your worship was not wasted. Sometimes there's times, isn't there, where you worship God in song or in prayer, or you're spending time with him and you feel like it kind of hits the ceiling and it doesn't go anywhere. It's just not true. Your worship is never wasted. Our feelings are not always true, are they? God is true, and our worship is never wasted because God is worthy and he deserves worship. And so our worship is not wasted because worship brings glory to God. And that is our ultimate purpose. We're supposed to enjoy God and we're supposed to bring glory to him, and our worship will do that. And so we're going to respond today by taking communion. The passage that we've been reading, it challenges us to consider how much we value Jesus right now in our lives. How much is he worth to us? Is he more precious than anything else? Has your image of Jesus become old? Are there layers of stuff, dust, grime, varnish, experiences that have just built up? And you know Jesus and you know he's good, but actually what you're looking at right now isn't as clear as perhaps it once was. Do you think you'll feel like you're just kind of looking at a picture of him that isn't really doing him justice? Or are you just finding that there are just other things in life at the moment that are just saying they're more valuable to you? You know, in the parable of the sower, where you kind of like, you've got the seeds that grow well, but then they're pulled down and they're choked by stuff, like whether it's job or money or worries or health or anything. But when those things become more important, is that something you're finding hard right now? So what I just want to do for a minute is just have a couple of minutes, just quiet reflection. Just spend some time asking Jesus to speak to you specifically about where you are at the moment with your worship of him. And so, as we come and take communion, what better place to refocus our gaze on Jesus, remembering what he's done for us, remembering the depth of his love for you. It says back here, lift your eyes and look, really look, and see his face again. And remember that all of this is by his grace. You don't need to sit there and get the paint stripper out and strip off those layers. He will do it for you. He will restore the image of himself for you. It is not something that you have to do. So, I'm going to read a passage and then we're going to take communion. When we take communion, we've got communion set up over there and over there. So when you're ready, when you've done your business with God, you feel like you want to go and take communion, walk up there, go and take the bread and the cup and take it back to your seat. Take the bread on your own, remembering Jesus. And then together, when everyone's been, we will take the cup and thank him for what he's done. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes."